no disrespect to Bill Buckner. I mean, the guy had the worst thing that happened more than anything is, besides how, they ended up losing the World Series, was the guy had an unbelievable career. He was a 20 career hitter, played like 20 years in the big leagues.
When you hear Lenny Dykstra talk about baseball legends, you don't expect words like greatest hitter to ever play the game coming out of his mouth. This is nails we're talking about. The guy who dove headfirst into walls, who played through injuries that would cripple normal men, who admittedly put HGH in his cereal every morning, just to survive the grind. But here's the thing about Dykstra. When he talks about the players he loved, the ones who built his world, you're not just getting a list. You're getting a blueprint of what it means to be out of bounds, to be fearless, to be absolutely relentless in the pursuit of winning. And yeah, he called Barry Bonds his GOAT. Let that sink in. If you're loving this kind of raw baseball talk already, don't forget to hit that hype button and show some love to this story. Because what Dykstra reveals through his 8 favorite players isn't just nostalgia. It's a manifesto of survival, dominance, and the kind of respect you earn when pitchers are literally too scared to throw you a strike. Let's start with the king. Barry Bonds sits on the throne of Dykstra's baseball universe, and it's not up for debate. Dykstra calls Bonds the greatest hitter to ever play the game, and he backs it up with one number that makes his case bulletproof: 232 walks. That was Bonds in 2004. Think about that for a second. In an entire season, opposing pitchers refused to engage with Bonds 232 times. They gave him first base like it was a peace offering, like he was a god they couldn't afford to anger. And to Dykstra, that's exactly what Bonds was, the god of the box. Dykstra led the National League in walks himself during his 1993 MVP runner-up season with 129. He knows what it takes to shrink the strike zone, to force pitchers into mistakes, to make them sweat. But Bonds took it to a level that defies comprehension. Dykstra's philosophy of baseball has always been simple. On-base percentage and plate discipline aren't passive stats, they're weapons. And Bonds wielded them like a samurai. When a pitcher refuses to throw you a strike, when he walks you intentionally 120 times in a single season, he's not just respecting you. He's surrendering. He's admitting that engaging with you is a losing proposition. For Dykstra, who spent his entire career fighting for every inch of the plate, who crouched low to shrink his zone, who fouled off pitch after pitch until he got something he could drive, Bonds represented the ultimate evolution of his own philosophy. Dykstra was a master of the walk, but Bonds was the professor. Dykstra could work a count, but Bonds owned it. Every at-bat was a chess match, and Bonds was playing against opponents who knew they'd already lost before the first pitch was thrown. The numbers tell a story that goes beyond home runs. Bonds finished his career with 762 homers, but it's the 2,558 walks that truly reveal his dominance. That's not just discipline, that's psychological warfare. Bonds turned the strike zone into a battlefield where he controlled every inch of territory. Pitchers would nibble at the corners, hoping he'd chase. He never did. They'd try to sneak fastballs past him. He'd crush them 450 feet. Eventually, they just stopped trying. They'd rather face the next guy than deal with the inevitability of Bonds making them look foolish. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the steroids. Dykstra doesn't dance around it. He's been brutally honest about his own use of HGH, saying it wasn't illegal back then, and everybody was doing what they had to do to survive the 162-game war of attrition. His take on Bonds and the steroid era is rooted in pragmatic relativism. If everyone's on the juice, then the separation between Bonds and his peers is still valid. The best players should be in the Hall of Fame, Dykstra says. Isn't it all about the numbers? But here's where Dykstra's analysis gets deeper. He doesn't just credit chemistry. He differentiates between brute force and genius. Steroids might help you recover faster or add 20 feet to your home runs, but they don't give you the hand-eye coordination to hit a breaking ball. They don't grant the discipline to accumulate 2,558 career walks. They don't teach you how to shrink the strike zone to the size of a golf ball and punish every mistake with lethal efficiency. That's craft. That's mastery. That's Bonds turning 60 feet and 6 inches of dirt into his personal kingdom. Dykstra understands this better than most because he lived it. He wasn't naturally gifted like some of his teammates. He had to manufacture every advantage. The HGH helped him recover, helped him play through the nagging injuries that come with throwing your body around like a human missile. But it didn't make him a better hitter. That came from thousands of hours in the cage, from studying pitchers, from refusing to give in. When Dykstra looks at Bonds, he sees the same relentless pursuit of dominance, just executed at a level that borders on supernatural. Bonds hit 762 career home runs. He posted an on-base percentage of .609 in 2004. Those numbers aren't just impressive, they're alien. And for Dykstra, who spent his career fighting for every inch of territory, Bonds represents the absolute perfection of the war he himself waged every single day. Before Dykstra became Nails, before he was diving into walls and spitting tobacco in the faces of pitchers, he was just a kid in Southern California with a dream and an idol. That idol was Rod Carew. And Carew wasn't just Dykstra's favorite player growing up. He was the blueprint, the architect of everything Dykstra would become as a hitter. Carew won 7 batting titles by mastering the art of contact, using bat control over brute force, precision over power. Dykstra, undersized and lacking natural leverage, saw in Carew a roadmap to survival. He studied Carew obsessively. He copied his crouched batting stance, lowering his center of gravity to shrink his strike zone. That crouch would frustrate National League umpires and pitchers for years, turning Dykstra into a walk machine and a base hit factory. But the emulation went deeper than mechanics. Dykstra wanted to embody Carew. He even started chewing tobacco because Carew did, an addiction that would haunt him for decades, but one he traces directly back to his childhood hero. Growing up in an era where really no one chewed tobacco out in the open, Dykstra says, "I have Rod Carew to thank for my Red Man addiction." There's a story Dykstra tells about being a kid and trying to follow Carew up the tunnel by the dugout. Security caught him and dragged him to what he calls stadium jail, but even that couldn't stop his obsession. He wanted to be near greatness. He wanted to absorb it, to understand it, to steal its secrets. That desperation to learn from the best, that willingness to cross boundaries and take risks, that was the foundation of Nails. Now, what Dykstra learned from Carew was that you didn't need to be the biggest or the strongest to dominate. You needed to be the smartest. Carew could place the ball anywhere on the field. He hit to all fields, spraying line drives that turned singles into batting titles. Dykstra adopted that approach, becoming one of the few leadoff hitters of his era who understood that getting on base was more valuable than swinging for the fences. Carew gave Dykstra his hands, his eye, his craft, everything else, the chaos and the fury that came later. Carew's influence on Dykstra went beyond just the physical stance and the tobacco. It was about understanding the value of contact, of putting the ball in play, of making things happen. In an era that was starting to worship home runs and strikeouts, Carew represented something pure. He represented the idea that hitting a baseball was an art form, not just a power display. Dykstra took that lesson and ran with it. Literally, he became one of the best leadoff hitters in baseball because he understood what Carew understood. If Rod Carew gave Dykstra the mechanics, Pete Rose gave him the soul. Charlie Hustle, the all-time leader in hits with 4,256 and games played with 3,562. Rose wasn't just a compiler of stats. He was a warrior who treated every at-bat, every inning, every game like it was Game 7 of the World Series. Dykstra modeled the way he played after Rose, calling him a determined, hard-nosed player whose style was the antithesis of soft. The most visible connection between the two is the head-first slide. Rose made it famous, a reckless, inefficient, but psychologically devastating maneuver that screamed total commitment. Dykstra adopted it as his trademark, diving into bases, walls, and crowds with a disregard for his own safety that became his calling card. Rose once said he'd walk through hell in a gasoline suit just to keep playing baseball. Dykstra heard that and thought, yeah, that's exactly right. That's the only way to do this. For Dykstra, Rose validated the idea that Wilson could overcome skill. Rose wasn't the most talented player of his era. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but he was the toughest. He was the guy who would break a catcher's collarbone in an all-star game just to win, which he did to Ray Fosse in 1970. That was Rose's world. And it was the world Dykstra wanted to live in. A world where you survived by outworking, out-hustling, and out-toughing everyone else. Rose played the game like every pitch mattered, like every play was life or death. He ran to first base on walks. He dove for balls that other players would let drop. He played winter ball to stay sharp. He studied the game obsessively, knowing the statistics and tendencies of every player who came before him. Dykstra saw that approach and made it his own. He turned himself into a student of the game, memorizing pitcher tendencies, looking for any edge he could find. Dykstra also connected with Rose's status as a student of the game. Rose knew the statistics of every player who came before him, and he used that knowledge as fuel. Dykstra respected that intellectual edge, even if Rose's image was that of a pure hustler. And when it comes to Rose's banishment from baseball for gambling, Dykstra doesn't flinch. In his eyes, Rose's demons don't erase his greatness. If anything, they make him more real, more relatable. Dykstra has always been drawn to flawed geniuses, and Pete Rose is the patron saint of that category. Both men shared a compulsion for action, whether on the field or off it, and both understood that greatness doesn't come in a clean package. Rose and Dykstra were kindred spirits in another way too. They both understood that baseball was a grind, a marathon, not a sprint. Rose played 24 seasons. He collected 4,256 hits by showing up every single day and refusing to take a playoff. Dykstra played through injuries that should have ended his career multiple times. He broke bones, tore muscles, crashed into walls, and kept coming back. That relentlessness, that refusal to quit, that came straight from Pete Rose. When Dykstra arrived in the major leagues with the New York Mets in 1985, he walked into a clubhouse loaded with talent, but desperately needing direction. The man who provided that direction was Keith Hernandez. While Dykstra was the spark plug, he readily admits that Hernandez was the engine. Hernandez was unique for his era, a refined cigarette-smoking, crossword puzzle-solving intellectual who also happened to be the fiercest competitor on the field. Dykstra marveled at Hernandez's sharp, measured approach to every at-bat and his ability to dissect opposing pitchers like a surgeon. Hernandez taught the young Mets, including Dykstra and Darryl Strawberry, the fundies, fundamentals, defensive positioning, reading pickoff moves, situational hitting, all the little things that separate good teams from championship teams. The 1986 Mets were a team defined by volatility. With personalities like Dwight Gooden, Strawberry, and Dykstra himself, the potential for implosion was always there. But Dykstra credits Hernandez with holding the unit together. Hernandez wasn't just a leader in title. He was the man who held teammates accountable, who demanded excellence, who refused to let the chaos consume them. When young players made mental mistakes, Hernandez was the first one in their face. Not with anger, but with instruction. He'd break down what went wrong, what should have happened, how to fix it. That teaching style, firm but fair, kept the Mets focused even when they were running wild off the field. In Game 6 of the 1986 World Series, when the Mets were down to their last out, it was Hernandez who calmed the team down in the dugout. Dykstra, who had hit the walk-off home run in Game 3 of the NLCS, understood that Hernandez's steady hand allowed his own chaotic energy to flourish. Hernandez represents the brain of Dykstra's ideal player, the intellect, the tactical mind that processes the game 3 pitches ahead. In a lineup of killers, Hernandez was the general. He called the shots, set the tone, and made sure everyone understood their role. What Dykstra learned from Hernandez was that talent alone doesn't win championships. You need a plan. You need discipline. You need someone who can see the bigger picture when everyone else is caught up in the moment. Hernandez gave the Mets that vision, and Dykstra never forgot the lesson. Hernandez also showed Dykstra that intelligence was a weapon. Knowing the scouting reports, understanding pitcher tendencies, recognizing defensive shifts before they happened. All of that was part of Hernandez's game, and it made him lethal even when his physical tools started to decline. Dykstra's relationship with Darryl Strawberry is the most complex on this list. It's a relationship defined by admiration, envy, and heartbreak. While Dykstra had to scrap and claw for every hit, utilizing extreme conditioning and eventually steroids to maximize his limited natural gifts, Strawberry was born with it. Dykstra described Strawberry as a physically gifted animal possessing big raw power that was simply unavailable to other players. Strawberry's swing was poetic, a looping, powerful stroke that could send balls into the upper deck with effortless grace. Dykstra, whose swing was a violent, choppy affair, looked at Strawberry with the awe of a laborer watching an artist. Strawberry had the kind of talent that comes along once in a generation. He was 6'6" with long arms and explosive bat speed. When he connected, the ball didn't just leave the yard, it launched into orbit. Dykstra would watch Strawberry take batting practice and shake his head in disbelief. Some guys were just built different, blessed with physical gifts that no amount of work could replicate. But admiration for Strawberry is tinged with the melancholy of what could have been. Strawberry's ceiling was higher than anyone else in the game, but he was also fragile. The demons that chased him, addiction and self-destruction, kept him from reaching the stratosphere everyone knew he was capable of. In 1988, Strawberry hit 39 home runs and drove in 101 runs. Those are MVP caliber numbers. But for Strawberry, they felt like underachievement. Everyone knew he was capable of 50 home runs, 130 RBIs, an MVP award, a Hall of Fame career. But the drugs and the chaos got in the way. Dykstra often refers to Strawberry and Dwight Gooden as family, as brothers. Their bond was forged in the fire of the 1986 championship run and cemented by the shared trauma of their post-career falls from grace. All three men struggled with addiction. All three saw their careers derailed by poor decisions and bad luck. But instead of judging Strawberry, Dykstra defends him. Dykstra defends Strawberry against critics who focus solely on his character deficiencies or drug problems. Instead, Dykstra focuses on the dominant Strawberry displayed when he was locked in. In Dykstra's view, Strawberry's demons were part of the package, the shadow cast by his immense light. By listing Strawberry as a favorite, Dykstra is acknowledging the sheer, terrifying beauty of natural talent, even when it's fragile. He's validating the bad guys' era of the Mets, asserting that despite the chaos, they were the kings of the world. Strawberry represents the body, the explosive physical potential that exists in maybe one player per generation. And for Dykstra, who had to manufacture every ounce of his success, Strawberry was both inspiration and tragedy. The contrast between Dykstra and Strawberry couldn't have been starker. Dykstra was 5'10", maybe 170 pounds soaking wet. Strawberry was 6'6" and built like a Greek statue. Dykstra had to use every trick in the book just to compete. Strawberry just had to show up. But that's what made their friendship so powerful. They needed each other. Strawberry needed Dykstra's fire and intensity to stay engaged. Dykstra needed Strawberry's talent to take the pressure off. Together, they were unstoppable. Apart, they were vulnerable. When Dykstra was traded from the Mets to the Philadelphia Phillies in 1989, he moved from a team of young renegades to a team living in the twilight of a legend. Mike Schmidt. Schmidt, widely considered the greatest third baseman in baseball history, was in his final season. But his impact on Dykstra was profound. Dykstra refers to Schmidt as the gold standard of excellence, a term that conveys deep respect for consistency and dignity. Schmidt was the antithesis of the 1986 Mets. He was stoic, corporate, and relentlessly consistent. 548 home runs, 10 Gold Gloves, 3 MVP awards. Schmidt was a machine. What separated Schmidt from other power hitters was his consistency. Year after year, decade after decade, Schmidt produced at an elite level. He didn't have the dramatic highs and lows of a player like Strawberry. He was steady, dependable, professional. He showed up, did his job, and went home. For a franchise starving for stability after years of mediocrity, Schmidt was everything. Dykstra, who would go on to lead the Macho Row Phillies of 1993, a team of mullets and dirty uniforms and zero apologies, recognized Schmidt as the foundation upon which the franchise stood. He respected Schmidt not just for his power, but for his professionalism, the ability to show up every day, play elite defense, and anchor a lineup for nearly 2 decades. For Dykstra, who often operated on the fringes of acceptable behavior, Schmidt represents the establishment ideal. He's the player Dykstra knew he could never be temperamentally, but whose results he strove to emulate. Schmidt's presence on this list lends credibility to Dykstra's baseball acumen. It proves that Dykstra can appreciate greatness even when it comes in a package vastly different from his own. Schmidt is the immovable object at third base in Dykstra's fantasy lineups, the gold standard against which all others are measured. He represents professionalism, the unglamorous but essential quality of showing up and producing at an elite level year after year after year. Dykstra inherited the throne in Philadelphia, but he never forgot who built it. The respect between them was mutual, even if their styles couldn't have been more different. If there's one player on this list who Dykstra loves as a soulmate, it's Darren Daulton. Dutch, the catcher and undisputed leader of the 1993 Phillies, the team that captured the imagination of Philadelphia and the entire baseball world. Dykstra calls Daulton the toughest player he ever knew and the unquestionable leader of that squad. Daulton's career was defined by physical suffering. His knees were decimated by years of catching on the unforgiving artificial turf of Veterans Stadium. He underwent 9 knee surgeries. 9. Yet he continued to squat behind the plate, driving the team forward through sheer force of will. Every day Daulton walked into the clubhouse, his knees were screaming. The pain was constant, grinding, unbearable, but he never complained. He'd wrap them up, pop some painkillers, and go out there and catch 9 innings in the blazing heat of a Philadelphia summer. Dykstra watched this and understood what real toughness looked like. It wasn't about playing hurt. Everybody played hurt. It was about playing destroyed and still being the best player on the field. Dykstra, who prided himself on playing through pain, viewed Daulton as a superior being in this regard. His unrelenting toughness had a dramatic effect on the mindset with which we all played. Dykstra wrote in a tribute after Daulton's death, "The connection between Dykstra and Daulton transcended the diamond. They were the leaders of Macho Row, the group of Phillies players who partied hard, played harder, and adhered to a strict code of clubhouse loyalty. Macho Row was more than just a seating arrangement in the clubhouse. It was a philosophy. It was about being tough, being fearless, being willing to go to war for your teammates." Dykstra and Daulton set the tone, and the rest of the team followed. They didn't care about being liked. They cared about winning. And in 1993, they dragged a team of cast-offs and misfits all the way to the World Series. The 1993 Phillies were a ragtag bunch. They had mullets and beer guts and looked more like a softball team than a professional baseball team. But they could play, and the reason they could play was because Daulton and Dykstra refused to let them quit. When things got tough, when they were down in games, when the pressure mounted, Daulton and Dykstra were the ones who stepped up. They were the ones who delivered the big hits, made the big plays, kept everyone focused. But as they aged, the relationship deepened. When Daulton was diagnosed with glioblastoma, brain cancer, Dykstra was one of his most vocal supporters. He called Daulton regularly, offered support, refused to let him face the fight alone. When Daulton passed away in 2017, Dykstra was devastated. He'd lost more than a teammate. He'd lost a brother. Daulton was also known for his eccentric beliefs in the metaphysical and the supernatural. These traits might have alienated others, but Dykstra accepted them as part of Daulton's unique genius. Dykstra cited Daulton and manager Jim Leyland as the 2 most influential people in my life. In Dykstra's pantheon, Daulton is the warrior king, the man who proved that leadership isn't about stats. It's about the willingness to suffer for the collective. It's about looking your teammates in the eye and saying, "Follow me," even when your body is falling apart. Daulton represents toughness, the capacity to endure pain and still show up, still lead, still inspire. For Dykstra, who built his entire identity on being nails, Daulton was the ultimate validation. The final spot in Dykstra's inner circle belongs to Mookie Wilson, the man with whom Dykstra shared center field during the Mets' golden era. The relationship between Dykstra and Wilson is one of the most successful platoons in baseball history. Dykstra, a left-handed hitter, and Wilson, a switch hitter, who batted right-handed against lefties, were effectively competing for the same paycheck, yet they formed a seamless unit. Dykstra describes Wilson as one hell of a nice guy, a high compliment from the usually acerbic Dykstra. This relationship highlights a surprising capacity for collaboration in Dykstra's makeup. Wilson was the good cop to Dykstra's bad cop. Wilson was beloved by fans for his smile and his hustle. Dykstra was loved for his grit and his intensity, but they made it work. There was never jealousy, never resentment. They understood that both of them playing well made the team better, and that was all that mattered. Wilson represents the element of speed in Dykstra's composite player. Both men were elite base stealers who disrupted the game the moment they reached first base. They could turn a walk into a double, a single into a triple, just by forcing the pitcher to worry about them. Dykstra respected Wilson's ability to create chaos, a trait Dykstra mirrored, but more importantly, Wilson represents character. In the ego-driven world of professional sports, Wilson accepted a reduced role to accommodate the rising star of Dykstra, and he did so without complaint. He mentored Dykstra, taught him the ins and outs of playing center field in the major leagues, showed him how to read fly balls off the bat. Wilson could have been bitter about losing playing time to a younger player, but instead he embraced the role of mentor. That kind of selflessness is rare, and Dykstra never forgot it. Dykstra recognizes this sacrifice. He knows that his own career trajectory was aided by Wilson's mentorship and lack of toxicity. The two are forever linked by the 1986 postseason. Dykstra's game-winning home run in the NLCS, Wilson's legendary at-bat against Bill Buckner in the World Series. They are the twin pillars of the Mets' miracle, and Dykstra's inclusion of Wilson is an act of enduring gratitude. Wilson is the player who reminds Dykstra that greatness doesn't always come with ego, that sometimes the best thing you can do is put the team above yourself. Wilson also taught Dykstra something else: how to handle success with grace. Dykstra was brash, loud in your face. Wilson was quiet, humble, dignified. They were opposites in almost every way. But Wilson never judged Dykstra for his intensity, and Dykstra never dismissed Wilson for his humility. They learned from each other, and that mutual respect made them both better players. So what does this list tell us? What is Dykstra really saying when he names these 8 men as his favorites? He's building a composite, the perfect ball player pieced together from the men who shaped him, the eye of Bonds, the ability to dominate the strike zone through fear, the hands of Carew, the technical mastery of the bat, the heart of Rose, the willingness to sacrifice the body for the win, the brain of Hernandez, the intellectual understanding of situational baseball, the body of Strawberry, the raw, explosive physical potential, the professionalism of Schmidt, the consistency of excellence, the toughness of Dalton, the capacity to endure pain and lead, the character of Wilson, the selflessness to put the team above the ego. This isn't a list built from WR or advanced metrics. This is a list built from lived experience, from battles fought in the dirt and the blood, and the chaos of 162 game seasons. These are the players Dykstra went to war with, the ones he idolized as a kid, the ones who taught him what it meant to be a major leaguer. Each one contributed something essential to the player Dykstra became, and together they form a complete picture of what baseball greatness looks like through the eyes of one of the game's most intense competitors. He doesn't care about your Hall of Fame debates or your sanctimonious takes on the steroid era. He cares about one thing: dominance, the ability to impose your will on the game, to make pitchers scared, to lead through pain, to sacrifice everything for the chance to be great. These 8 players represent the architecture of Dykstra's soul. They are the foundation of the House of Nails. Barry Bonds taught him that fear is the ultimate respect, that when opposing teams would rather give you first base than face you, you've achieved something transcendent. Rod Carew taught him that craft is survival, that technique and precision can overcome physical limitations. Pete Rose taught him that will beats skill, that showing up every day with relentless intensity matters more than natural ability. Keith Hernandez taught him that the brain wins championships, that understanding the game intellectually is just as important as executing physically. Darryl Strawberry taught him that natural talent is both a gift and a curse, that being blessed with ability doesn't guarantee success, and that demons can derail even the most gifted players. Mike Schmidt taught him that consistency is its own form of greatness, that showing up and performing at an elite level for 2 decades is harder than having one spectacular season. Darren Dalton taught him that toughness is the highest form of leadership, that enduring pain and still inspiring your teammates is the mark of a true warrior. Mookie Wilson taught him that character matters, even in a game built on ego, that selflessness and humility have value, even in the cutthroat world of professional baseball. This is the world Lenny Dykstra built, the House of Nails. And inside it, these 8 names will echo forever. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real. Because they showed up. Because they fought. Because they were willing to be out of bounds, to push every limit, to sacrifice everything for the game they loved. Look at these 8 players and you see the full spectrum of what makes baseball beautiful and brutal. You see the artist and the warrior, the intellectual and the animal, the professional and the rebel. You see every style of greatness the game has to offer, all filtered through the eyes of a man who understood that greatness doesn't come in one package. It comes in many forms, and the smartest players learn from all of them. That's the legacy Dykstra honors. That's the list that defines him. That's the manifesto of a man who lived every moment like it was Game 7, who played every inning like it was his last, who looked at greatness and said, I'm going to take a piece of that for myself. And in the end, that's what these 8 players gave him. The pieces of greatness that turned a skinny kid from California into one of the most feared leadoff hitters in baseball history, into Nails, into a legend in his own right, into a player who understood that baseball isn't about being perfect, it's about being relentless.